Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to present a framework that I've been putting a lot of thought into about how perception constructs itself that I hope will not just help people make more sense of their own minds, but can contribute to really having a more sophisticated, necessarily more complex understanding of consciousness, different phases of consciousness, to help us make more, in order to have better discussions about particularly complicated philosophical debates in consciousness. So I'm going to relate this to that, and you'll see what I mean. So getting into it. How does perception emerge? From where do we get all this? This 3D complicated landscape with emotional signals and distinct structures and all these labels and terms and concepts of everything. Where does all this come from? So in order to understand, we peer our mind back to the source. Now, I actually don't even want to, I'm going to use the word source, but it's something I don't even want to name. It's not even nothingness. I draw the symbol of the yin-yang symbol, which I particularly like, but even that I don't want to symbolize what comes before. You cannot represent this thing, and it is before representation. But now we're talking about from the before representation emerges, and what I see is four necessary components of all phenomenological experience. All experience, all perception has these four qualities to it. And these four qualities are: one, valence. Every iota of experience has some valence to it. There's some minimal content, some little bit of suffering, no matter however minute. The beginning, it's just disturbance. You can hardly be said to call it suffering. But it's there. Compared to this, it's there. Another aspect is space, time. This all representational content has to be presented some kind of space-time, some location, place, space. Now, it also has to come in a form of a sense modality. Now, for humans, in particular, this is going to be, either a visual sight, an auditory sound, or a somatic sensation. There's also tasting and smelling. This is particularly interesting, is the format of the content that has to be presented, has to take place in one of these senses. But we could think maybe for other species this is different, like sharks. They have a sense called electroception. It might be different here. Now, this last component, I thought a lot about, what to call it. I thought maybe awareness or consciousness or knowing of the kind, maybe information. But for now, I've settled on actually delusion. So that every moment of experience has an aspect of delusion. That all representation is actually misrepresentation. representation is always to some degree not the thing it's trying to represent. And what we've got here is we've got something which is not a thing, can't be captured, tries to represent itself. And then from there, complexity emerges. So I'm going to draw a hierarchy. Imagine there's a hierarchy of interconnected webs and strings of signal and content that bundle together to create your full 3D, 4D, experiential world, really. And so I'm going to give an example of a particular thread that emerges from here, a very basic thread, and see how things come to be. Now, before I get into what that is, I'm going to describe a kind of there's a logic to perception. So most people understand that you have your focus attention. Okay? You put whatever content is in attention. X. Now, a good resource that I like is the book The Mind Illuminated, and it makes a good point about distinguishing between focused attention and peripheral awareness, right? So down in the stack, there's this fuzzy stuff at the edges. We can only pay attention to one thing at a time, but there's more happening in experience at any one given time. Peripheral awareness. Now, the thing about if you have X in attention, it evokes not X. There's something other. There's something other. Maybe you can't see it in detail, can't make sense of it. There's something other happening at the edges, emerging from the shadow. Now, I think more and more people are kind of getting this distinction, and we, especially when we're talking about meditation, we have to include that. A lot of people get confused. I'm supposed to focus on my breath, and only be aware of the breath. But I feel my body and these other things. Okay, I'm going to add another element here, which I think, again, we need to add this to our conversation, our understanding different phases of consciousness. Again, a sort of even simpler level here, less form, less distinction, is amodal perception. Calling amodal perception. To get a sense of what amodal perception is, I'll give you the example of, okay, if I hold my hand out right now, you can see the palm of my hand. You can't see the back of my hand, but it's amodally perceived, the back of my hand. It's inferred, You don't know how you know it. You can't see it, smell it, taste it, or anything like this, or hear it. You get a sense that there's some informational content, right? There's filling in the gaps of experience. This amodal perception. I encourage you to look for this in your own experience, not through the video, but at home, about this world. Okay, there's walls, but there's a presumption that there's more behind the walls, despite the fact you don't see this stuff. Amodal perception also relates to your judgment about the weightiness of objects. How much does that weigh? You've got to pick it up. Okay, you had some idea you can be off or not. And normally we think, well, amodal perception is it comes after attention and awareness, because you have to first experience something to then presume that there is more than experience. Experience the palm of the hand to think, oh, then there's the back of the hand. Yes. But actually, I'm going to suggest actually it comes before. Amodal perception must be informed by something prior. There is something prior. We can't know it, but there is something prior. So I've got a hierarchy of perception that's going to emerge. There's a realm in which there's just amodal perception. A realm, a strata of mind. There's just amodal perception is forming. Before peripheral awareness has come online, or focused attentions come online, it's just like information, and you don't know how you know it, but you could tell it's going to bloom into a sense modality. It comes with some informational content. It's ultimately delusional, and it still has this disruption to the ultimate peace here. Okay, so information will travel from the source into amodal perception, into peripheral awareness, into focused attention. From focused attention, that information can be integrated back into peripheral awareness. Peripheral awareness can hold more content, but at less fidelity than focused attention. And from peripheral awareness back into amodal perception, and then ultimately back to source, right? And for a bigger box around all of this, what comprehends, the intelligence that comprehends this whole process, this whole structure, is metacognition. And as I explained, there's a kind of logic to this, that again, if you invoke X, you've suggested not X. Right, we'll see how this plays out here. So I'm going to give an example of a kind of the first beginning forming of how the mind begins to shape itself. So the first signal that comes out of this, the first attempt to try to represent this, again, it comes it comes to amodal perception, is nothing. The signal of nothing. A kind of suggestion there. And nothing comes first rather than thing, because nothing actually holds less informational content than thing. Thing, then thing raises all the kind of question, well, what kind of thing, and what's contained in the thing. Nothing is simpler, and so it comes first, it springs out of this pregnant void. What we realize is that this was pregnant with all that will come after it. It's all an attempt to represent this, and yet can't get at it, So nothingness, the signal of nothingness comes out. It's not quite it. Okay, you see how things come about. With nothingness comes about, now nothingness can bloom emerge into peripheral awareness, and now we're vaguely becoming aware of nothing. Again, nothing is still, it's not nothing. Nothing is an active signal. Nothing is actually an active signal. Again, now that nothingness is coming about, it's evoked not nothing. Not nothing. And then as nothing rises in the hierarchy and ascends to focused attention, we've got that not nothing comes into peripheral awareness. Not nothing. And there's more informational content in amodal perception. So yeah, this here. Okay, and now the signal of nothingness can go back into peripheral awareness and integrate itself there. But what does this not nothingness reveal? Now, when it's time for this not nothingness to come into focused attention, it's realized to be a something, an impersonal thing, right? I'm saying impersonal thing. I'll explain. Again, now we've evoked not impersonal thing. The mind is now starting to comprehend things in the environment, things with faces and edges and sort of more structure and form. Again, these sense modalities, whether it was a sound or a sensation, it's taking more shape as the consciousness gets richer. I will say that normally out of the void, we got, sight, sound, sensations predominantly. Most of the time, it's going to be a somatic sensation that triggers this chain of event. If you have a cessation in meditation, say, it's mostly going to be a somatic sensation that springs you out of it. Not necessarily could be a sight or a sound. However, I think, perhaps potential reason for this, evolutionary reason why somatic sensation seems a bit more primarily dominant as a foundation of experience, is perhaps because all creatures that can see can feel, but not all creatures that feel can see. But it is conceivable that a sight comes first. Less likely it's going to be a smell or a taste. All right, going back up here. So, yeah, in personal things, this consciousness, again, is a good argument to suggest that consciousness evolved first to detect its environment, detect around the environment. There's things in the environment. Don't bump into that rock, and there's a nutrient source here, right? And then later, at a later time, that process became self-reflective, and the apparatus used to detect the environment got turned in on itself. And what we see is this impersonal thing. It's going to reveal itself as there is a self. There is a being. There is a being that is aware, right? And now here we've got the self in attention, right? When it came from a modal perception up the hierarchy into peripheral awareness, recognition of I am. And look how high, actually, relatively how high, this goes way up, but how high relatively in the hierarchy self-comprehension is. So I think people who are arguing that the raw I am is as fundamental to experience as it gets haven't seen through these people. They haven't realized the construction of this. And it could be for a number of reasons. They don't have a sufficient metacognition, or their noticing per second aren't fast enough. They don't have enough sensorial precision and clarity. But this is why in my stages, the stage of enlightenment, the big mind is at a stage before not self, right? There's more to recognize. And that perhaps, what blocks people's perception of the ultimate, getting clearer, is we could think of this as like a crystalline structure that you have to polish, to see, to be able to see through. And if you haven't polished a certain layer, it has some ardency, it obscures perception of what is before. And then once this is sufficiently polished, your diamond of enlightenment, despite attention being at higher levels, the reflection of the lower levels is always sort of, refracted and gleaned back up, even at the higher levels. So you don't lose sight of this. Third path is like just right here, just right at this sort of a singularity point. The source of the empty void is perceived as like a nothingness point. And they haven't quite sort of pushed through. Not that, they don't have cessations as well. And yeah, so my camera cut out. But continuing on, just relating this more to people's experience, this nothingness, that's really like 7th jhana territory. This is more 8th jhana territory, right? So then, self is in attention. You've got that not self, but not self in like an impersonal way. There could be something other than the self, right? And then that will reveal that there are other selves, perhaps. So this is an example of a thread. There's many threads we could take to understand this. Example of another one. Go back down the hierarchy. Comprehension of space. How a sense of space complexifies, where there'll be an amodal sense of space and time to kind of give itself as a here and a now. There's information presented. You don't really know where, when those concepts or ideas haven't come up in the mind yet, but it must have some general. You don't know how you know it, but it's obviously happening. The information is obviously taking place. Once this comes more into peripheral awareness now, here and the now. I'm just giving another example. So you can see how perception forms and kind of the logic behind it. So again, what you see is now because you've evoked here and now, you've got not here and now coming into amodal perception. Because this here and now comes into focused attention. H in the end stands for here and now. So you realize, oh wow, this is happening here, it's happening now, and it is, you get this, sense of the ultimate here and now, timeless here and now. But the irony is, if you're evoking that, then you're getting not here and now. It might not be quite as good. There's something other emerging from the shadows. Not here and now, and then that might show itself higher up in the hierarchy. You recognize, oh, there's a kind of a there and a then. And make some space here. How you see this, like in people's experience. So this here and the now, that might be seen. You take the sense modality of sight, the primary, as a kind of like this, here and now and attention, like that. People report, here and now, and it's all kind of unified, because this is the kind of the oneness experience, right? And then a layer up from this, and you hear this in people's reports as they awaken more. People, first, before getting to a kind of oneness, right? You see how oneness is not down here even. Draw this. People report kind of interconnectedness. Where, attention can sort of move from point to point, but maybe they see the threads in awareness of how it is all connected. And once you start getting more sensorial data points emerging, once you've got a relative, this data point and then this data point, now you have to construct a landscape to fill in the blanks. But this is to the left of this, right? Before that, when you're existing in a much simpler mind, you haven't necessarily constructed that space yet. That space is not in consciousness. It's just a thing happening. But now I'm aware of more things, and I have to fill in the blank of what's in between the things. How do the two things relate to each other? Then people talk about interconnectedness, oneness, but then, up from that, you've just got like distinctive spaces, cube, and you don't know how they relate to each other. Maybe attention is on this space, and you said, well, there's a kind of another space, but you don't know how they relate to each other. It's just another example. So, yeah, I kind of wanted to demonstrate, talk about this framework, because I think it adds necessary complexity to our understanding of how the mind works. I believe, right, understanding this, and this is incredibly, complicated. This will take a lifetime to try to map and make sense of, or that could even happen. And I will say, it's one thing to be able to have polished the diamond of enlightenment so that you can see through to the lower stratas of mind and get this viscerally. It's another thing to integrate this information, pull it back into the higher levels, and comprehend it through concepts, and use our language to talk about this. People who they'll get this, but they don't have the framework or the words to be able to describe this stuff. And I barely have that. This is me trying to put these sort of deeper insights into words. But I'm going to suggest that depending on where the information is located, whether it being focused attention, peripheral awareness, or amodal perception, plays a big part, not fully, but plays a big part in informing where people will stand on certain high-level philosophical debates around consciousness. So, for example, take the inverse spectrum conundrum. Is my red, what I see as red, the same as what you see as red? Right? If you're understanding this at a particularly high level, abstract level, then that seems like a real, sort of very real conundrum, But, you track it down, that signal of redness, right? It may appear more as just kind of information, for example. Another key one is the signal. As a signal that you're clocking, there is consciousness, there is experience, right? If you catch this signal emerge at an amodal perception level, right, before focused attention and peripheral awareness really had time to take shape. Consciousness is time to take shape. It's this really raw information. You don't know how you know it, but it's like less than a thought. Here you can have a sympathetic view to an illusionist view of consciousness, right? Before its consciousness itself is thickened up, become more rich and bubbly as perception complexifies and evolves. Perhaps that's why some people might have that kind of stance, that kind of leaning. Why people tend to say, well, consciousness is just a thought, right? But in this high level, how can it be just a thought? The world is so full of color and experience, Less so at this level, Maybe Dan Dennett really is very, very enlightened. So this is what, just a framework I've been working on. I hope it can clarify, some things to people. And someone asked me, right, when I was describing this, are you talking about entropy? And yes, I am. Now, if I sort of use any terms that coalesce with terms used in classical physics, Big Bang moment or anything like this, at the moment it just stands as an analogy. But at some point, classical physics will have to marry and merge with phenomenology, right? And at some point, even down here, right, the hierarchy, the perception that there's a distinction between phenomenology and ontology. It's so vague and murky, you can't even distinguish between the two before they break apart. This also relates to other conversational topics such as ethics, the valence factor. How isolated it distinguishes there's valence in all experience. At the higher levels, you go from, okay, there's just kind of something that is reducing suffering and less suffering to, well, no, actually there is pleasure and unpleasant and Vedana, neutral, pleasant, unpleasant forms. There are things worth sort of adding value and attachment, and then a meta-ethical conversation, and then you get so abstract, you've kind of lost sight of this. You're talking ethics, you're talking kind of more real-world application of, well, what is good to do? Maybe good is multi-faceted. We want beauty, meaning in life. Have you, for the philosophers among us, have you ever had a discussion with someone who just can't do meta-ethics? They seem they just can't quite get to that level. It just generally talk about ethics. Perhaps this kind of structure and how clearer perception to them might relate. So I'll say this. Finally, I'll put this out there. If you're interested in coaching, personal, private one-on-one coaching with me for understanding perception in the mind better and cultivating a brain that suffers less moment to moment, you can go on my website and find more information there. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.